the morning of April 10th, 2001, I remember waking up in the morning, about 6, my normal time. Didn't really feel very good, didn't feel like I was up to going to school that morning, so I thought I might, sleep in until about third period, which started around 11. So I set my alarm clock for 11 o'clock, and next thing I remember is waking up in the Juvenile Detention Center in Ephrata, Washington. What went through my mind when I first realized where I was, where am I at? What am I doing here? What happened today? What went wrong? They asked me if I knew why I was there, and I had no idea. I asked them what had happened, and they told me that I had taken a gun to my third period class and held them hostage for a number of minutes.
What bothers me about this whole thing is that now we know that Corey was hallucinating on Paxil just a month after he went on them. Corey is afraid to tell us about the hallucinations and the bad dreams because he thought he was going crazy. This is a Mormon boy who had never smoked or drank, never used illegal drugs, didn't know what a hallucination was from Adam. This psychologist suggested that he needed medication. And we've had experience with medication with my wife and postpartum depression, so hey, we were just very at ease with this, and we took him to our family practitioner, and he suggested Paxil.
When you look at the widespread use of these mind-altering drugs among children is where you're going to find the answer for the violence that we're seeing in children today.
After being on Paxil for about a year, I was changed to a different drug called Effexor, which is pretty similar. But the feelings I had were just, I was hardly ever there mentally. My mind was going everywhere, couldn't stay focused, couldn't think. I basically felt like I was just in the clouds all the time.
Children in particular, out of control, aggressive behaviors.
I thought I was going crazy. I was hallucinating, I was seeing things, I was hearing things. While I was on the medication, I felt like that was what was supposed to be going on. I had no idea what would happen to me, what other people would think, because that's what I thought was the normal thing.
He told us that he'd seen dark figures and heard voices while he was sitting in class at school. We also were found out through deposition by a friend of his that he had told her that he'd had a terrible, horrible nightmare about going into school with a gun. And this was a year before he actually went into school with a gun. I remember getting the call that Corey had come to school with a gun, and I raced to school. And we spent some time with Corey in the principal's office. Corey was just a pile of sweat. I mean, he was sweating. He looked confused. He didn't know. He just had this look on his face of horror and scared and fear.
In Dallas, we had 2 children on Paxil this summer, a boy 10 and a girl who just turned 15, who stabbed their 6-year-old brother to death and buried him out back. Both kids on one of these drugs.
Well, the moment I woke up was really in a cell of the Juvenile Detention Center, and pretty much had a little tiny window to look out of, but I just laid on the bed, and people were walking by. I could see people, was terrified, didn't know what to say, didn't know who to call for. I've never had any amnesia symptoms before this happened. Eventually somebody, asked me if I was all right and asked me if I knew why I was there, and they eventually told me.
A few months after Corey was arrested and in detention, I happened to have a chance to talk to Clint, who's Corey's friend, and I asked Clint, I said, when Jamie asked Corey, "Are you going to hurt us?" what did Corey do? And Clint said he looked down at the gun like he was surprised it was there. And then he stopped, and he was real quiet. We found out after Corey was arrested, and it was a couple of weeks later, Corey finally confided in one of the counselors that he'd been hallucinating. And he was seeing, the counselor called me at home and said, "Are you aware that Corey's been hallucinating?" And I said, "No, I'm not aware." And we just saw him Sunday. And she says, "Well, he says he's been seeing tigers and bears and things in his room and outside his room." So that had me concerned, because that was the first time I had been aware that these things can cause hallucinations. These kids can be in what they call a dream state.
I was held at the Grant County Juvenile Detention Center for a total of 14 months. Coming from a really small town, being in the juvenile center was a pretty big experience for me. I really had no idea what went on. I felt I felt pretty intimidated at first.
In the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, kids had access to guns, possibly more than they even do now. And yet you did not see the school shootings. The difference I see then and now, with this being a whole new phenomenon, the school shootings, is the drugs.
Yeah, I've had people say, don't you feel guilty because you had the gun available? Now, the gun wasn't the problem, it was the drugs. We've had guns around our house all the time. I was raised with guns in the house. I knew the gun was there. The gun wasn't locked up. This was a gun that Corey's grandpa had given him. Corey had used it to go hunting. I felt at ease with Corey having the gun there. If Corey hadn't been on the drugs, there wouldn't have been any problem. And in fact, the psychiatrist that we hired, he said, well, we don't know because of Corey's amnesia whether he was hallucinating that he was hunting. And we know that he was hallucinating later in detention on effexor. He was seeing lions and bears in his room. So we don't know because of the amnesia. I don't know if anybody really wants to know what I think about the doctor that prescribed these drugs. I mean, he put him on medication that can cause hallucinations, did not tell us about the side effects. All we heard about was the computer printout that they give you at the pharmacy that says nausea, headaches, and vomiting. Didn't tell us about the abnormal dreams, the hallucinations, the depersonalization, which Corey experienced when he was telling us that what he remembered was seeing himself with a backpack on and a gun in his hand. When I heard that in detention, to me, it sounded like an out-of-body experience. So I was concerned, and I called the psychiatrist that we'd hired, and he said, well, that's depersonalization, and it's a side effect of the drug. We noticed that Corey's anxiety, now we know, it was only happening early in the morning. He'd get up in the morning and he'd be anxious about going to school, and he'd just fret about it, and he just said, I can't go to school. And then later on in the morning, he would tell his mom, hey, Mom, take me to school. I feel better. And we feel now that it was his low blood sugar. He hadn't had anything to eat, and he's an eater.
No one other than Dr. Tracy has mentioned that nutrition is a big part of it.
Corey's MD that prescribed the drugs never mentioned. I mean, I think he's probably spent 10 minutes with Corey in his doctor's office, and no one, the psychologist, no one has mentioned the possibility of nutrition being the problem, or allergies or anything else. One thing we learned from this whole experience is that, we're a strong family. And that God blessed us. And blessed us with good friends and a good family. Because at Corey's sentencing, we had over 50 people from the community came to be with Corey, along with 15 of the staff members from the detention center, which had never been done before. And they all together, with their supervisors, wrote a letter to the prosecutor stating that they didn't think Corey should be in jail and he should be let out. Interesting that once we decided, he needed to be weaned off the drugs, and I talked to Dr. Tracy and I'd learned a lot about weaning the drugs and tapering off, I had to tell the MD how to do it and what prescriptions we needed.
When we decided to start taking me off of the medication, I thought it was a great thing. I felt really good about it. And as I was getting off, less and less of a dosage, I started feeling better and better.
Corey was on 300 milligrams, and so he lowered it to 225, and he was on that for a couple of weeks. And we slowly lowered him down from 225 to 150 and then 75. And we know that it was too fast, because when he got to 37.5 milligrams, he finally had a clear head, and he just said he's not taking them anymore, and he cold turkeyed off of effexor. And within 2 days, he was just a ball of emotion. So we talked him back on the drugs, and he calmed down, and then we slowly brought him down from 375 to 25 milligrams to 20 milligrams. And then we had to go to a compounding pharmacy to bring him down, and we brought him down 5 milligrams at a time over about a month-and-a-half period. And he's been off the drugs since then.
When I pulled my son, Michael, off all the drugs and stopped them, within 3 weeks he shot up in height, in weight. He looked healthier. At one point, the school teacher, feeling very sorry about the whole ordeal, came to our house with her sympathy, and she looked at him and she said, "Michael, you look wonderful." And to me, it was a different child. He looked healthy. He never looked healthy on the drugs. He looked gaunt. He looked wasted, like he was wasting away. He was always tired, didn't have an appetite. And now I had my little boy back again.
Everybody has emotional issues in life and goes through points when they're depressed, and it doesn't mean they have a disease. And I now know, or I've known, that I don't have a disease and I don't have anything wrong with me, and I'm not doomed to be depressed forever.
Over the last 13 years, as I have worked with so many people on these medications and seen them as they have slowly withdrawn off of the meds and gotten their lives back together again, it's like watching someone being born, because they say over and over again, "I have my life back. I can do this, I can do that." It's so sad to see how many things you can no longer do when you take these medications, and yet when you wean them slowly off of the drugs, and then they begin to rebuild their body with the nutrients that they need and that the drugs have depleted from their systems, they become whole again. They can function again, and they're so grateful to just be normal.
Now that I'm off the drugs, I feel really great. I feel like I can, be myself, do things for myself, actually do things, I know what's going on now. I can take hold of my life and really get it going.